The fundamental argument is that these resources on the customer side in the demand stack, as y'all noted, are often cheaper than supply side resources and can be aggregated, managed, and deployed to address specific grid resource needs. And the more that our regulators and our utilities think about demand stack resources in that way, the better we can plan and the cheaper we can deploy resources to address those big mega trends we discussed earlier, whether it's load growth or increasing rates and so on and so forth.
Hey, Jeannie.
Yeah, Brew.
Who's our guest on the Energy Nerd Show today?
Today we have Neil Veilleux from Uplight. Hi, Neil.
Hey, Neil.
Hey, guys. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So what have you been working on lately?
Oh, I've been working on a ton of stuff related to the demand stack. Maybe I'll give you a little bit of background on Uplight and myself and what we do, and then some of the challenges we're trying to tackle and why we're excited about the concept of the demand stack and how it can help utilities and regulators. Does that sound good?
Great. Sounds great.
So Uplight's a software company. We work across North America and in Europe as well. And we work primarily with utilities. So we provide software to utilities to help them with sort of two core needs. One around customer engagement. So how do they sort of engage their customers successfully and educate them about their energy usage and needs. And so those are products like home energy reports or utility marketplaces where the utilities can sell different energy saving devices, or online portals or high bill alerts or email marketing, those sorts of things. And then the other side of our house is focused on DERMS, distributed energy resource management systems. And in that case, we'll use our software to run demand response programs or virtual power plant programs. We can integrate with utility ADMS, advanced distribution management systems, so that utilities can sort of see where constraints are on their distribution grid. And then using our edge DERMS, they can control DERs like water heaters or EVs, or smart thermostats or batteries to address those distribution constraints.
Yeah, that's exciting. So what part of that are we going to dive into today?
I think it'd be cool to just talk through how utilities can use distributed energy resources as a grid asset, right? And so that's sort of like the fundamental concept of the demand stack. And so I don't think I need to tell you guys, but like it's well known that we're facing significant load growth issues in North America. So for the first time in decades, we're seeing substantial load growth from electrification or data centers or onshoring of manufacturing. At the same time, we're facing a reduction in capacity, of new capacity rather, because we're facing all sorts of supply chain constraints. That are slowing deployment of traditional supply. We're also sort of seeing a slowdown of renewables because of federal policies. And so the grid's under a tremendous amount of strain, right? And you're seeing that in reports from like NERC and others, where they're showing that like 14 of the 20 regional assessment areas are at elevated risks for reliability. And all of this is sort of causing upward pressure on rates. So you have sort of like this big stew of challenges for the grid and sort of managing costs for ratepayers. And we think part of the solution, right, our critical part of the solution to those challenges is using our demand side assets more efficiently, right? So by that, I mean, how do we aggregate more smart thermostats, more EVs, more DERs, and use those as a grid asset? So this is a pretty normal argument for like demand side management programs, but we're really sort of focused on how do you take demand side management to the next level.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. I think getting new supply online quickly is super important, and and then to the extent that can be virtual power plants, and then sometimes that can be quicker, right, and more flexible and less expensive. And so, there's a lot of reasons to mine this particular resource opportunity as thoroughly as possible.
Right. With affordability being such a big theme, I know that we found that some of the resources that we always considered baseload are just so much more expensive than what's on the margin today, but they stay open. And now they have to stay open because of this huge increase in demand. So anything that's more affordable is going to be super appealing.
100%, right? And I think the affordability issue is is a critical issue that we as in the energy community need to confront today.
So Neil, specific. So when you say demand stack, like what do you mean by that? I mean, how does that concept fit into this?
Yeah, so the demand stack is it's really just a concept and I can share my screen with you here. It's to think about customer side resources, same way that you think about supply side resources. Your traditional supply stack, right, is structured to address baseload needs, mid-tier resources, or peaking resources, right? So in a sort of conventional supply stack, you might have nuclear or coal that's sort of always on and running as a baseload resource, right? And maybe you have some mix of hydro or gas as a mid-tier resource, sort of scaling up dynamically in response to grid needs. And then you have your oil or gas peakers, which are used as a peaking resources for very few hours of the year, right? But that's sort of how grid planners at a very high level traditionally manage their supply resources to address grid needs, right? And all we're sort of articulating is that, like, hey, let's think about the demand side of the equation in the same way, right? And move out of sort of this programmatic or approach of DSM and really think about how can demand side resources address grid needs in the same way that the supply stack does. And so in that concept, you would have like your always on resources like energy efficiency, right? Which are providing reductions, almost every hour of the year. And then you have your mid-tier resources, which could be considered things like EV managed charging or time of use rates, which are sort of scaling up dynamically to shift load when it's needed. And then maybe you have your peaking resources that are only used for a few hours of the year from like traditional demand response, like behavioral demand response or automated demand response. And so maybe there's like 10 events, 20 events called over the course of a year for your peaking resources. But the fundamental argument is that these resources on the customer side in the demand stack, as y'all noted, are often cheaper than supply side resources, and can be aggregated, managed, and deployed to address specific grid resource needs. And the more that our regulators and our utilities think about demand stack resources in that way, the better we can plan and the cheaper we can deploy resources to address those big mega trends we discussed earlier, whether it's load growth or increasing rates and so on and so forth.
So for policy and planning and operations to not just take load as a given, demand's just there, but think of demand as a resource and all these different multiple resources that can fulfill different roles in terms of making the grid work well, efficiently and reliably.
Totally. Multiple and dynamic resources, right? So traditionally, demand response, it's like the traditional approach is like just pull the big red lever, right? And let's get like emergency demand response a few times a year when the grid's peakiest. But we're sort of articulating it's like, actually, you can think about it in a much more nuanced fashion, right? So absolutely use these resources for those emergency events. But you can also get very targeted with our software to address specific distribution constraints, maybe on just one or two feeders, right? Or for one transformer, right? Or you can really think about how much do we want to invest in energy efficiency because we want to sort of bring the entire load curve down versus how much do we want to invest in time of use or demand response to shift, specific hours of the year in order to meet grid constraints. And so the real crux here is moving demand side resources out of the domain of just customer programs and really engaging grid planners and grid operators to use these resources as a reliable grid asset.
Yeah. And I think the way you have them stacked, it shows that each resource has different attributes. And I mean, we've seen all those resources. I've seen them grouped, but not really kind of stacked in that kind of parallel with the base load and mid and kind of peaking resources. And so are you really saying that in that influences the way the planners are thinking about it, or you hope it will?
Both. It is influencing how some planners are thinking about it, and we hope it will influence more, right? And so, again, I think traditionally DSM programs have been fairly simple in their construct, and grid planners will use the capacity when they need it for emergencies, but they don't really plan around it, right? And so with some of our utilities now, we're getting pretty deep into the regulatory planning process with them. And really helping them think through, like, well, how much efficiency do you want to build or deploy on your network? And then how much, do you want to expand your smart thermostat programs or your battery programs to address these specific targeted constraints? And how we sort of bring that together as a portfolio that can be deployed cost effectively. And if we're doing that, it actually changes the way you think about your DSM filings, right? And suddenly, maybe your DSM filing is traditionally just focused on energy efficiency and demand response, but you actually want a more expansive regulatory process so that you can bring in time of use, DR, right, energy efficiency, and really electrification, and really start stacking these resources to provide to serve the grid needs that the utility has. And that requires a whole sort of new way of engaging with your regulator to do it effectively.
We've had guests on the show talking about gas system planning, and we've been really talking about electricity today so far. And I'm wondering how, and this really is electric, right? Not so much gas, but how could this does it relate to the gas system planning and operations? Are there opportunities there?
Yeah, it does. We tend to be pretty laser focused on the electric system, right? With our offerings. We do provide some gas DR programs, right? It's interesting, sort of the needs of the gas grid are a little bit different, and sort of the timing required for, or the length of events for DR and gas is a bit different. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's so much work going on integrated electric gas planning that I could foresee a day when sort of the demand stack really starts to take into account gas grid constraints as well. We are not there yet, right? We're sort of like laser focused on electric, but I totally agree with you, Bruce. I think over time we could get there.
I'm wondering what reaction you're getting from utility folks about the demand stack.
Yeah, generally very, very positive, right? And especially for utilities that are looking for new ways to engage their regulators, right? And really prove the value of their demand side resources. The demand stack becomes a very helpful concept, very powerful concept. We're working really closely with a utility in the South right now who's looking to re-engage their regulators. And then we are advising other utilities on how they can start to present the grid value of their DSM programs as well. So in some cases, we're going full bore, like, hey, let's present the demand stack. In other cases, like the concepts are helpful and it sort of is used in some of the behind the scenes analysis.
And are you incorporating these really large load customers, data centers, into your thinking, and like what would their role be in this demand stack idea?
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. Lots of discussion across the industry, not just with us, but across the industry about how flexible data center loads can be. And so data centers, of course, want to interconnect. It's a challenge for many utilities to interconnect data centers successfully. And so the data centers in some cases will act as a virtual power plant themselves, and they can sort of flexibly adjust their compute load at different times to reduce the impacts on the grid. In other cases, they are deploying batteries or other assets that we can manage on their behalf or on the behalf of the utility to hasten their interconnection. So a lot of discussion about that, but a lot of complexity to be ironed out still.
Is Uplight kind of all over the country? Like, what's your geographic reach, and are there areas you want to get into in terms of geography and particular grids or new topics?
We do work across the entire U.S. I think we have I think it's 80 utility clients. So we work with most of the major IOUs. We also work in North America, and so across North America, rather. So up in Canada, we have a lot of good relationships. And then we work with like independent power producers, large asset providers, like battery storage developers across Europe and Australia as well. So we have a global footprint, but primarily focused in the U.S.
What's the next thing, or what's required to really make this catch on and be ubiquitous, standard practice, rather than a lift?
There's so many issues that are being ironed out in the world of virtual power plants and the demand stack and demand response. Some of the ones that I tend to think a lot about is M&V. I think M&V is like a critically important issue that perhaps doesn't receive enough attention. But for grid planners to really depend on the demand stack, they need accurate forecasting, right? And then they need accurate reporting on actual performance, right? And so spending a lot of time ensuring that we have the appropriate forecasting tools in place, and then that we can dispatch for the period of time needed for the specific geographic constraint required, right? So we work with the Western utility right now on a project called Predictive Capacity Dispatch. So it's all focused on smart thermostats. Traditionally, smart thermostats reduce a lot of load in the first hour, and then they sort of degrade over time as customers opt out of participating in the program over like a 3 or 4 hour period. But with Predictive Capacity Dispatch, we can forecast and then manage dispatch of those thermostats to provide a consistent load reduction over 4 hours, which makes the product much more attractive to grid planners, to grid operators. And so those kinds of innovations are what we expect to see more of in the future. And then the last one I'd say is just continuing to integrate more and more OEMs, right? More and more of the thermostat manufacturers or the EV providers or the battery providers, so that effectively any customer in a utilities territory that has a smart device, a DER, can be integrated into the virtual power plant. So yeah, those partnerships and M&V forecasting, I think, are some of the really critical issues right now that the industry is confronting.
On that predictive piece, are you using AI for that yet, or so I'm looking for useful applications for the capabilities of these new token factories?
Yeah, it's all based on machine learning, and the more events that are called, the smarter the system gets, right? So our predictive forecasting gets more and more accurate as we integrate more devices and we call on more devices. So every event we're sort of learning and getting more and more accurate. I think in our latest tests, we got to like 98% accuracy of our forecast, which we were pretty pleased with, because that gives sort of certainty that grid planners can use when they're looking at 50 or 100 megawatts of capacity. There's a lot of great reports for folks who are interested in this. I think I linked one on the concept of the demand stack. But yeah, if anybody's interested in these topics, give us a call. We'd love to talk about it. We'd love to design the right kinds of experiments with their utilities so they can get experience and sort of build the trust among their stakeholders that the capacity is reliable. We'd just be excited to collaborate with anybody. So maybe I'll leave it there.
Cool.
Sounds good.
Well, thanks for being on the show, Neil. It's great talking with you.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Jeannie. Good to see you guys.